You're listening to Systemic Error Podcast. The failure was designed.
Moaning MAGA fans find new grievance as their own families dump them, based on an article by Tom Hartman. The family rift is not the story, the vote is. The split has a cause. The source story starts with holiday tables and estranged relatives, but the real subject is power, who used it, what they knew, and what they enabled. The emotional rupture is not some spontaneous outbreak of left-wing sensitivity. It is a direct consequence of people voting for a project they understood perfectly well, then demanding social access as if the damage were abstract. That distinction matters. A person who helps elect a movement dedicated to removal, domination, and racial grievance does not get to rename the fallout as politics when their family stops answering the phone. They knew what they were voting for. The central fraud in the right-wing complaint machine is that Trump voters are supposed to be treated as confused consumers who only wanted cheaper eggs. The source article is right to reject that lie. It lays out what was on the table: explicit anti-immigrant racism, Stephen Miller's public deportation obsession, the Heritage Foundation's blueprint, and a second Trump term entered with full knowledge of who Trump was and what he intended. That is not accidental misunderstanding. It is informed consent to authoritarian politics. When people vote for the racist architecture and then plead innocence after the machinery starts grinding, they are not being misread. They are trying to launder culpability after the fact. ICE is the point. The clearest evidence of the administration's priorities is ICE itself. The source cites more than 675,000 deportations, a detention population above 68,000, deaths in custody accelerating, and a system that has grown without basic human capacity. That is not administrative drift. It is organized cruelty. And no, the answer is not reform. ICE is not a misunderstood agency waiting for better training. It is the enforcement arm of a deportation regime that the administration is using to terrorize families and normalize disappearance. It should be abolished. The lies about cost and crime. The administration's justifications collapse under their own numbers. The source points out that undocumented immigrants pay tens of billions in taxes, while the criminalization story is grotesquely inflated against the actual scale of sexual violence in this country. Those facts are not included by accident. They expose the function of the rhetoric to provide moral cover for ethnic sorting. That is the pattern. First comes the scapegoat, then comes the bureaucracy, then comes the prison-like infrastructure, then comes the lecture about necessity from the same people who built the emergency. Misdirection as political strategy. Right-wing media wants the offended relatives to be cast as the problem. The story's outrage is supposedly the refusal to look past a vote. That framing is deliberate misdirection. It turns consequences into feelings and turns conscience into cruelty. But the refusal to keep performing warmth for people who backed persecution is not hysteria. It is a rational response to a political choice with clear victims. The harm is not in the silence at the holiday table. The harm was in the ballot cast for mass removal, racial grievance, and the erosion of due process. What this reveals: the larger pattern is simple. Authoritarian movements do not succeed by hiding their aims. They succeed because too many people accept the bargain, then demand that everyone else pretend not to notice. The family rupture is what it looks like when democracy stops being an abstraction and becomes a personal standard for association. The deeper scandal is not that some people no longer want to host the people who helped build this. It is that the country still has to be reminded that voting for cruelty has consequences, and that refusing intimacy with cruelty is not a breakdown of civic life. It is one of the last defenses it has left. You've been listening to Systemic Error. Thanks to Raw Story for today's article, with the automated voice of LJ. Thanks for listening.